the collapse of the freedom of speech in the future is not going to arrive as an obvious collapse of the freedom of speech. A tyrannical administration is not going to arrive on the scene and declare that one's freedom of speech is lost, that one's freedom of speech is restricted or outlawed. A tyrannical administration, an authoritarian administration, is going to arrive on the scene and say that it is protecting freedom of speech. But in the process or act of protecting freedom of speech, it is going to create categories that it uses to negate the freedom of speech. So in the future, it's possible that an authoritarian administration says that in the name of protecting freedom of speech, it's going to outlaw the act of declaring something to be disinformation or the act of declaring something to be misinformation. That the act of declaring something as disinformation or the act of declaring something as misinformation is itself a violation or attack on free speech. This is the way that the negation of the freedom of speech is likely to arrive in the future. So, if an administration gives out propaganda information to the public and journalists want to challenge or criticize the error of this information, this administration will say that this opposition, this act of criticizing or refuting the error, is itself an act of attacking the freedom of speech because it falls under the category of misinformation or disinformation. So the categories of misinformation and disinformation are going to be used to silence the freedom of speech. But it's not only the categories of misinformation or disinformation. These are just examples of a way that a tyrannical authoritarian administration might make use of notions to restrict the freedom of speech. Now, it's not only the freedom of speech that I suspect will be restricted in the name of freedom. Freedom will be declared, and every time that an official declaration is stated or a narrative which is asserted to be true is contradicted, then in the future, the administration, the powers that be, will say that the opposition to this, the criticism of this narrative, is itself an attack on freedom. And that's not the way that the freedom of speech works. Freedom works in terms of being able, of having the right to dissent, of having the right to attack a statement or a proclamation. Freedom of speech does not consist in declaring a narrative and then disallowing or censoring any opposition to that narrative. That is not freedom. That is tyranny. That is how tyranny operates. That is how tyranny functions. And so in the future, we are likely to see this process play out over and over again, that we are going to see narrative dominance, narrative supremacy, wherein individuals who gravitate to or adopt a specific narrative claim that it is only that narrative that has the right to freedom, and that any act of challenging or criticizing or seeking to refute that narrative constitutes a violation of freedom. This is completely false. It's completely backwards. It's turning the idea of freedom of speech on its head. Now, the other tactic I think that we will see within the formation of an authoritarian administration is the tactic of declaring the opposition to be domestic terrorists. This term is very important, domestic terrorism, because the term, the category of domestic terrorists will give special rights to the administration to persecute and prosecute those who speak out in opposition to the error of the administration. So this idea of domestic terrorism, it might have a different title than that, but most likely it will be labeled as domestic terrorism, as being a threat to freedom. The tragedy is that the reality is all of this comprises an inverted reality. An inverted reality meaning that the individuals who are claiming that they are protecting freedom are really destroying freedom in the name of protecting it. The individuals who are prosecuting the opposition, so-called domestic terrorists, are actually persecuting and prosecuting and punishing the individuals who are trying to uphold freedom, the individuals who are trying to defend civility, the individuals who are trying to fight for a democratic society. Those are the individuals who are going to be suppressed by an authoritarian regime through authoritarian tactics. So we are likely to see these things unfold in the future. And the important thing to remember is this idea of inversion, is that we're going to see the opposite. The reality is going to be the opposite of what is being claimed. The individuals who say that they are protecting and upholding freedom are in fact doing the very opposite. They are using that as a mechanism by which to destroy the right of freedom. The individuals who say they are going after dangerous individuals are very likely going to be going after the individuals who are important to freedom, the individuals who are actually defending freedom.